Royal Highness the Princess Anne travels the world a great deal. There are many reasons for these travels, of course, but often they're in support of some urgent charities, such as the Save the Children Fund. She likes to see for herself the plight of people in the developing world and encourage others in the belief that poverty, ignorance and disease can be tackled if we so have a will. My own travels have far too often taken me abroad to seek the release of innocent people who've been deprived of their liberty. But as chairman of the international wing of the YMCA, I too have more than a passing interest in development. Princess Anne has many other interests, of course. She has strong and determined views and is not afraid to express them from time to time. So I'm honoured and delighted to have an opportunity to exchange views with her today in her apartment in Buckingham Palace. Your Royal Highness, we're meeting today here in your apartment in Buckingham Palace, and it's a place which is surrounded by memories for you. I'd be interested, first of all, to hear some of your childhood memories of this building and this place, some of the events that you remember as a child, and you look back on.
I don't think you would really, actually. I was rather resented living in London. I never really analysed any memories in particular, because I've never really stopped living here to some extent. So I don't really think of it in terms of having particular memories. I've moved around in a sort of this sort of level of the palace. And as the family grew, we all sort of shuffled down and moved another room, or round the corner and down the passage. In that sense, you know, we've always been in the same area in the palace and much the same views of life. I've seen a lot of guard mountings and parades and carriages and tourists and one or two other things going on out the front here.
How is it you first became interested in the developing world?
I think that was a process. Like everybody, your own development in a way comes first, because without that you have no appreciation of anything else. So there was those experiences to go through. And then feeling one's way into the sort of things that one was going to start to do in public life. Thinking about the things that you were most interested in and that you might be able to help with.
You know, work with the Save the Children's Fund, well known and applauded, but you're a mother yourself. You have children. Are you, what sort of a mother are you? Are you a disciplinarian?
I don't think you ought to ask me that. I don't think I'm going to tell you either.
What sort of father are you?
I don't think it would help. I'm sure you're very good. I don't know. I think I'm certainly not going to let you ask my children. It'd be even worse. No, I don't think there is an answer to that, is there? I think you rely on the experience that you had as a child yourself. So it rather depends whether you think I was well brought up on with this. Pass the buck, you see.
Exactly, send it back to me.
They're all right. I feel I can take them with me now. That
yes.
Causes me too many embarrassments.
Are you strict?
About what?
Things in general. I mean, things that parents are strict with, and as far as children go.
You mean punctuality? Or
punctuality, good manners.
Washing their hands after.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes, I suppose I verge on I think I like to, perhaps my experiences actually in that sense have coloured my attitude towards that side of discipline, in that if you don't really get across certain principles at an early age, forget it. It'll be too late later. But once they've, I think one always ought to try and explain why it is that you're imposing disciplines of any sort. I don't think one ought to impose disciplines just for the sake of it. there are usually reasons. The reasons used to children are not normally immediately obvious, and especially if you are thinking in the long term about its effect, its knock-on effect with other people and in their older age. Very difficult to understand. So sometimes the discussions are shorter rather than longer.
And you give me one. I must give you an honest answer myself. You give me one. I mean, I think I've got too exasperated too quickly. Mm. And I suppose for me, home has been the place where, having been out and about and having to be...
A little bit of peace and quiet.
Well, having to be very constrained, you know, very polite at times, and working within quite clear boundaries. Home has been the place where I felt I could be myself, and, well...
Yes.
You know.
I think you've been working to... If you get accustomed to timetables or being shoved around or being in charge, I mean, home actually becomes quite difficult after that. As a person left in charge behind is... Actually, I don't know whether you find it. Perhaps you may do. Even my staff, I think, find it to some degree. Coming back from those longish trips where you've been involved in talking to strangers a lot, and you've been making conversation all the time, and you really probably had to work quite hard mentally just to keep the thing ticking along. And you go home and you're suddenly assaulted by a myriad of rather what you consider, because you've just come home, wholly unimportant problems, which are causing major crises in the home, and you think, what have I come back to? And you need to go away for 2 days, really, to be completely cut off before you can start again. And your family and friends find you're talking busily away to somebody. Why don't you shut up? You be quiet for a moment. And you really just got sort of... It's because you've been travelling, and it's the sort of change of pace of life. I don't know whether you find that.
I was advised at the end of a major trip to conclude the official programme and then to go away for 2 days before going home.
Yes.
And I could never do it because always, as soon as I finished the programme, always in my mind was the fact that at home I knew the pile of mail was increasing and the things to attend to were building up. And I tried it, and the 2 days were really 2 days of agony.
You could have taken the mail with you for 2 days and left everybody else. That might have been easier. But I think there is some sense in it, actually. I think there is a readjustment period required.
Yes.
And especially if it's been, as I'm perfectly certain many of your trips are, rather more emotionally involved in the sort of negotiations that you have to go through. And that's a very much more dramatic transformation than the ones that I have to go through. And to have a wind-down period is probably much more important for you, I would have thought. I think
Times it's been quite draining. I mean, because I've been conscious that if you make a false move, you can lose a life, or you can, almost without thinking, set off an incident which means a lot of lives are lost. And it's a responsibility that at the actual time I don't think about too much, because there isn't time to think about it. I mean, you're there, you're dealing with a problem, and you're totally involved. But it's when you step back from it and you realise the responsibilities that do lie on your shoulder, and you know that nobody else can take them. If things go wrong, the responsibility lies fairly and squarely with you, and nobody else can take it. And sometimes it is difficult to live with.
Yes.
Hard to live with.
And when you go home, you don't really want to be asked, why are the drains still blocked?
Exactly. I think it's fair to say you've established over the past years a reputation for, certainly for getting around, for being forthright, and for getting to the truth. And in some ways I can imagine that's quite difficult to do. I mean, in my own journeys with the Archbishop, in many ways he's treated not just as a person, but as a symbolic figure. And it's right in one way that he should be treated as a symbolic figure. But it has its drawbacks, because it means that at times people
maybe not deliberately, yes, perhaps deliberately also, try to conceal the truth from him. Try not to let him see what might not be the desirable side, and it takes a bit of probing and pushing sometimes. Now I can imagine if it's a difficulty for him, it could be an even greater difficulty for a member of the royal family. How do you, when you go around, how do you get to the truth, and how do you assure yourself that you're really getting to the heart of the matter?
Well, in some respects, through the Save the Children Fund, it's been comparatively easy once we established some ground rules on how we wanted to do the trips, and the fact that we actually wanted to go out and see the teams at work in their projects. Then you have people who are working on the ground, who've been there for some time, and who do know what's going on, because, I mean, you can't live in a place for very long and have the wool permanently pulled over your eyes, especially if you're doing that sort of work. And that if you really set out to gather information and to make sure that they understand that you're not there to just criticize or look for the bad points, that you're there to try and seek information so that you can help more constructively, then I think people will tell you the truth at the end of the day. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that that's always true, but I think after a period of time, and you can pick out the ones that aren't. And having also said that, to be honest, if you keep your eyes and ears open, just while you're driving around, you can learn a terrific amount. And then it becomes easy to tell whether you're really having a leg pulled or not, because you've probably seen or heard, or, you know, that patently obviously isn't true.
What do you enjoy about your work with in development? What gives you most enjoyment, most personal satisfaction?
I'm not sure that enjoyment is actually the right word. I'm heartened that I think there is progress to be seen to be made at the sort of level, particularly that Save the Children Fund is working at. Because it's very, I won't say easy, but it is actually quite easy to improve an infant mortality rate, because there are such simple things that go along with improving that rate. Soap and water, remember, clean soap and clean water, and just a little basic hygiene, and the right sort of foods and steroids, and that simple can improve the standards of childbirth and the chances of survival for infants, and you can improve the chances of, with your immunisation program, that they won't suffer from diseases like measles, which are such a great killer for young children in Africa. So the satisfaction there that you can produce really quite a startlingly quick improvement in conditions. It's the next bit which is the difficult bit, but even that I think you feel you can make progress in, as long as you're training enough people and moving along in the right directions.
Are you optimistic when you look to the future?
Well, I think I'm probably a pessimist by nature or habit, I'm not quite sure which. But yes, I think I am optimistic. I think there's so much potential really in the world. I mean, it may look very depressing from time to time, but there is so much potential both in natural resources and human resources that it's only a question of time of getting the two together.
Do you think we really do enough in this country for the developing world? Do you think we could do more? And if we could, what should we be doing?
I'm sure we could do more. I mean, people are fairly evenly divided, I think, between those who feel that giving assistance overseas is very right and proper. And that we have so many advantages in our own civilization and lifestyle that we ought to help others as much as possible, and therefore we ought to put more money into it. And there are those who feel that we spend quite enough money overseas, and in fact we ought to concentrate more on our own problems here at home. Having said that, it's all very well for us to sit here and say, well, we can do that, and we even think we know where the right place is to go. But there are actually human beings at the other end who might not necessarily agree with us. And again, that's something I think one must take into consideration, because they are individual nations with very individual cultures and traditions, and people with perfectly good brains of their own who've had their own civilizations. So, maybe there are things that rather more subtly, I mean, they may feel that through their own efforts they're going to make their own progress, or they don't always want to look this way.
I just wish myself that more people could see that participation in development, I know this is a bit of a hackneyed slogan now, participation in development, but it's so true, is really a major contribution towards working for world peace. And it really is. I mean, having seen myself, people in refugee camps, people who are without hope, those places are the places where, when hope dies, people become bitter, and they're breeding grounds for terrorism. They breed problems. And unless, I've so often said it myself, unless we will really tackle those fundamental problems, we can speak for as long as we like about peace, and we shall just be beating in the air.
I think that's right. And I don't know whether you find that in those circumstances, when you go to refugee camps like I did, and you find, like I did, our Save the Children Fund team has a New Zealander and possibly an Australian, a couple of Swedes, and a French team of doctors, all working side by side with the locals, in this instance, and Sudanese, and all learning from each other and working together. And that's an encouragement in itself.
You visited many parts of the world which would be considered to be dangerous in one way or another. And any public figure nowadays is subject to unusual and different threats. How do you cope with that? I mean, how do you face personal danger? Do you feel afraid? Is it something you think about constantly?
No, I think I seldom think about it. It's. I think I have thought about it. I mean, and then and after that, you probably don't think about it very much. I suppose the answer is that if it's there all the time, you become unconscious of it. It's part of life. I mean, threats or anything else, it's difficult to take them terribly seriously.
But in some ways it seems that because of developments that are taking place, a different form of barrier is being put between yourself or the monarchy and people in public life and people generally, which in some ways is very unfortunate. And I wonder if in any way you feel that you are presently constrained from moving around and getting around as you'd wish to get around, and from meeting people as you'd wish to meet people. Obviously you've done that, and done that very successfully.
Yes, I'm not sure that it's very much different really now than what it has been in the past, in terms of not perhaps people in public life, but certainly in either political or even the monarchical terms. Plenty of threats, attempted assassinations in the past. And people forget about them very quickly. I mean, they've always existed. I don't think there's anything quite so new now. And the possibilities are perhaps different.
I certainly haven't forgotten, and it will be in the public mind, but what was it, 10 years ago when you yourself were subject to a kidnap attempt just outside here?
12 years
12 years ago, was it?
Yes.
And then again you were subject to certain threats in South America.
Yes, well, I suppose the one here was slightly more pertinent in the sense that it actually happened. But he was on his own, so that made life slightly easier. Fortunately, if he brought a friend, it might have been difficult.
Yes, exactly.
It's been tried before. I mean, Queen Victoria had 5 attempts on her life, I think.
Was it 5?
So it's something, when things are going well, people tend to forget about. And makes it all more dramatic when it sort of rears its ugly head again from time to time.
My wife and I, we were held up twice in Africa at gunpoint. We found ourselves looking down the wrong end of a machine gun. And the second time, she was pregnant with our son. And the chap who stopped us didn't see her, and she was in the shadows. He'd stopped our car, didn't see her. And then he suddenly saw her. And he was so shaky, I thought, my goodness, that's it. But we lived to tell the tale.
Not been faced with that problem, unfortunately.
No, it's not a very pleasant experience. And at the time one didn't think of it, but afterwards, you know, one breaks out into a cold sweat when you think, what could have been?
Yes, I mean, most people would consider us fortunate that we're unlikely to face the sort of muggings and robberies that, you know, a lot of people have had to suffer from, and on apparently an increasing number. And I think that's right, because it's a very much more personal fear, isn't it? And somehow robbery is a psychologically very wounding thing as well. Never mind the problems that might go with it. And general violence in the street. I mean, we probably won't suffer from that as a problem, but if somebody decides that it's worth their while either kidnapping you or just killing you, I don't believe there's anything very constructive that we or anybody else can do about it.
Just changing the subject from that, a recent opinion poll, so I'm told, I'm not a great student of opinion polls, but I've been told this, so I'm going to put the question to you, see how you can respond to it. A recent opinion poll said that the monarchy is as popular now as it's ever been. Now, whether that's true or not, as I say, I don't know. It's a difficult question for you to relate to. I mean, how do you answer that? How do you relate to that? How do you explain that? Do you think it's true? And how would you explain it?
Well, I mean, do you think they had opinion polls in...
That's a good point.
when Queen Elizabeth I was doing her thing? I think it's almost irrelevant. I don't know is the answer to that. I mean, it could mean anything. It depends where they went and who they asked and what time of day they did it. And you know, I think those sort of things are very...
Well, let's take the question on a bit, because I agree with your answer. I think it is pretty difficult to relate to that. But taking the question on a bit, Britain's changing dramatically, and I suppose as Britain changes and values change, do you see the monarchy changing? And if so, how? What is its role today?
I think the role probably hasn't changed enormously. I think I mean, like every other family, the different generations who reflect what's going on in their own generations around about them to some extent. So it may change from that point of view. But I think it's probably essentially the requirements of the monarchy haven't changed. Since goodness knows when. I think people have a level of expectancy probably about how it conducts itself and how much it should be involved in public life and the type of things that it ought to be involved with. And I doubt really if that's changed very much, because I think if they really looked back at what's been going on and what the family were interested in the past, it was probably very similar, perhaps not so international, or just not so noticeable. Interest in media being what it is, of course, the whole thing has become rather more open. In monarchy, I think, was an extraordinarily open business. I mean, you had these extraordinary public levees and things like that. Everybody was invited along. It wasn't recorded on tape, but it was public nonetheless. So there was an element of extraordinary public vulnerability in the past, and it's different in that extent. I mean, the public side of it is extended in sheer weight of numbers under certain circumstances, and that perhaps the private side of life has become more important because of that. You know, there should be an element of privacy somewhere.
When you look to the future for yourself, where do you put your priorities for involvement in public life in the coming years? I mean, are you free to determine that pretty much for yourself? And if you are, where would you like to put them? Where do you want to make your own mark?
I'm not sure about the freedom to determine exactly where, because I think essentially you're a public servant, and what you do is largely what people ask you to do. And maybe you don't have control, but you may have some influence in the way in which you've done, or way in which you've got involved in other areas of work before that. Whether or not individuals choose to specialise totally in certain areas remains to be seen. I think that would be a pity. I don't think I would like to do that, but then because I really enjoy the variety.
I'm going to put one final question, and I'll answer it first, so that rather than put it as I did the other way.
To give me a hint, is it?
Give you a hint. The final question is, if it's an impossible one to answer, really, but if you hadn't been who you are, what would you have liked to have been?
You're quite right. It's totally impossible. All right,
totally
what would you like to
I'm
have
going
been?
to answer. I would
Engine
like to have been a musician. I love music. I can't play any instrument. I've tried the piano and I get hopelessly tired out with it. I think it must be absolutely marvellous to be able to, at the end of a day at least, to sit down and to play the piano. Probably that's the direction I would like to have gone in. But then,
You're sure you mean a professional musician? You wouldn't like to have the talent for your own relaxation?
I may balance it. I may balance it.
Life of a professional musician could
But
be
what
quite
about,
hard.
yeah, what about you?
Well, I mean, it's not exactly the first time I've been asked the question, and I've never yet really come up with an answer. I don't. I suppose I've never really had any startling ambitions in any direction. And as I say, one of the probably total inability to concentrate is my greatest problem. I've always enjoyed the variety. And in a way I would miss that. If I then had to try and concentrate on any one subject for any length of time, I've often wondered whether I could actually do that. I mean, there are lots of things I in theory, would quite like to have done. I mean, it started at school when I wasn't allowed to do the subjects that I thought I wanted to do. That was a different problem. I might have felt more like, having specialised in some other area. But I've often wondered, really, whether the sort of 9 to 5, working, doing the same job, concentrating on the same problems or solving problems, or sort of thing, I could really settle down and do. Perhaps the answer is I wouldn't change now. I don't know. But I totally sympathise with the musician bit. I would love to have been able to play an instrument well, but I think I would have, on a selfish basis, I would like to have been able to do it really as a form of relaxation and to entertain myself. And to be able to perhaps join friends, for that kind of thing. And I've never been good enough at that. Instead, I suppose I've always stuck with a sport that I've always been connected with in some way because it was there.
Your Royal Highness, thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much. Perhaps you never know, one day your ambitions, you might be allowed to be a musician for a day or two.
You never know.